Hello, everyone. Welcome to the class tonight. I'm happy you all could join me. I'm gonna pop a link to the handout in the chat right now. There we go. In case you all didn't get that. So just a few things before we get started. This class is being recorded. I will be sending a link to the recording on YouTube once it's ready to everyone who has registered. I will also be sending you a follow-up email tomorrow that will include a link to download a copy of my presentation and also the handout. So you don't have to worry about taking a lot of notes or anything because you'll be getting all this information. And let's see, and if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat box. It's fully open, so you can go ahead. I can't really respond to raised hands because there's no Q&A box. I'm not going to be taking any questions while my presentation is going on. We will have plenty of time for questions at the end, so don't worry about that. Okay, so before we get started, we acknowledge that the Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem, providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people and is a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We are committed to land acknowledgements for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context for our planning, deliberations, and public engagement will take place from the spirit of welcome and respect found in our motto, free to all. Okay, so for those of you who are new here and don't know who I am Jessie Wheeler. I am the genealogy specialist here at the BPL. I work in the Research Services Department at the Central Library in Copley Square. So today's class is about newspapers and print resources for genealogy research. So this is just a little bit of what we're going over. We got a lot to cover. So we should, but like I said, we'll have plenty of time for questions. So don't worry if you miss anything. Okay, so this is just what we're going to go over. We're going to go over basics of the newspaper collection. We're going to do an example of how to find an obituary in microfilm. Obituaries are the most common things that our newspaper collection is used to locate. We're going to talk about some other useful things that are on microfilm and microfiche, including city directories and telephone books. We're going to go over how to find an obituary in a database, and which includes, we're going to talk a little bit about other online resources for newspapers. And we're going to talk about our print collection. So we're going to talk about what we have available, how you can access them, and we're going to go over a few examples of some useful print resources for genealogy research we have here at the BPL. And we're going to go a little bit over some useful websites as well, depending on how much time we have. Okay, so first up is basics of the newspaper collection. For those of you who have been to the BPL before, this is what our microfilm area used to look like. This is in our old location in Bates Hall. We are now located in the Washington room, but I like Bates Hall better, so that's why I left this picture in here. So before we get started, something that's very important, at least I think so. What you see here on the left is microfilm. It is a reel of film. So it's a strip of film wound around a plastic reel. What you see on the right is microfiche. So these are little rectangular sheets of the same material as microfilm. It's basically the same, it's just a different size and shape. They are indeed two different things. If you say microfilm here, we're going to think this. If you tell us you want microfiche, we're going to think you want this. So that's just something to keep in mind if you do happen to come in here. So for newspapers on microfilm, we have a very big collection. So we have a handy research guide that you can use to see what we have. So we're going to take a quick look at that here. Here we go. So we have several lists, PDF lists here that will tell you what we have. So we're going to take a look at the Boston newspapers, and you can see this list is 16 pages long. These are just the Boston newspapers, which represents just a small part of our collection. We have quite a lot. How this list is organized, you'll have the call number on the second column here, the name of the newspaper, whether or not it was a weekly or a daily or a monthly or something else. And the dates, these are the dates we have. They're not necessarily the dates that the newspaper ran. These are just the dates we have. So these are important things to note because, as you can see, we have gaps in coverage for several. So you can see, for instance, this one, we do not have it between 1968 and 1970. So basically, we don't have the year 1969. So again, this column is what we actually have, not the one the newspaper was necessarily published. You can also, in addition to looking at that list, you can also check our catalog to see if we have a particular newspaper you're looking for. Most of them are going to be in there. So you can do a search in our catalog for that. But as always, if you have a question about something, you can always just contact us and ask us. That's the best way to find out whether or not we have something. Okay, so just a little bit more about our collection. Most of the collection is Massachusetts, but we do have newspapers on microfilm from all around the world, including we have quite a few newspapers from the United Kingdom and Ireland, and a few in France. And let's see, so from about 2008, 2009 to the present, the only newspapers that we still get on film are the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald. I'm sure most of you remember there was a recession around that time, so our budget got cut up by a bit. So those are the only ones we still subscribe to. We do not have any newspapers on microfilm past 2009 other than the Globe and the Herald. So microfilm can only be used in the library and only in the central library, and you have to request it at the Research Services Desk, which is located on the second floor of the McKim building. You do need to have a physical library card with the BPL in order to request any microfilm. If you happen to be visiting from out of town, you can get a research card at the Borrower Services Desk or at the Book Delivery Desk that will allow you to request a microfilm. We get a lot of folks in who are just visiting, who use our microfilm all the time, so that's definitely something you can still use even if you're not from here. So as you might have been able to see in the picture I just showed you a little bit ago, the microfilm readers are attached to computers, so they are also scanners. We do offer, I need to take that line out. Right now, we're not charging for printing. However, we are only doing black and white. I will say, though, printing is a little complicated right now. The networking doesn't always work. So the easiest option, and which is scanning and saving the image to a flash drive or to the desktop and emailing it to yourself. However, really the easiest option is saving it to a flash drive. So if you're going to be coming in and doing a lot of work with microfilm and you take a lot of scans, I would highly recommend bringing a flash drive with you. That is by far the easiest way to save whatever you find on microfilm. Okay, so as I said before, the primary thing that folks usually look for in our microfilm collection are obituaries. So then we're going to go through an example of how to find an obituary on microfilm at the BPL. So first things first, these are the things you will definitely need to know. You'll need to have a name, a death date, and the location of the death. We cannot find an obituary for you, and we cannot help you find an obituary without these three key pieces of information. If you don't know the date of death, but you do know the location, what you can do is request a death certificate or a death record from the municipality where the person died, and the death certificate should have the death date on it. So a death date is definitely something you will need. Secondly, if you want to do some prep work, you can check the newspaper's LibGuide to see if we have a newspaper from the right location covering the right time period. So we're just going to go ahead and take a look at that. So in addition to Boston, there's listings here for Massachusetts newspapers, US newspapers, special collection newspapers, and early American newspapers. So you want to check these lists to see if we have something that will cover the right place and time period. Then you will fill out a request slip for the microfilm that you want. I'm going to show you an example of that in a little bit. Then you want to bring the slip to library staff at the Washington room desk. That's where we're located. And we're going to get the film for you and show you how to use the machine if you're not familiar with it. And you look for the obituary. If you find it, you can print and save the results. If you're having trouble with it, just ask us for help. That is why we are there. Okay, so for an example, we are going to use my maternal grandmother. So we know her name was Jeanette Ann Herman. Her maiden name was Archie, also known as Mrs. William F. Herman. So this is something that's important to know if you're researching a married woman, and if it's from a certain time period, she might be in there under her husband's name. So it's a good to know her maiden name as well as her married name. So we know she died on November 1st, 1968 in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. So armed with this information, we're going to look at the listings, and we're going to see that the Berkshire Eagle, which covers Pittsfield, we do have it for that time period. So we're going to fill out this slip. This is it on the left. You're going to include your name, your library card number, the city, state, and zip code. So we're going to pull the microfilm for you. You're going to take a look at it and see if you can find it. And lo and behold, there it is. So the obituary for her is located in the Berkshire Eagle on November 1st, 1968 on page 14. And as you can see here, the headline lists her as Mrs. W.F. Herman. So that's why it's important that we know married women's husbands' names, because the headline does indeed list her under her husband's name. So I will say this is somewhat unusual in this case, that the obituary was published the day that she died. That is not usually going to happen. Most often the obituary or death notice will appear. The soonest would be the day after, and sometimes it can be a few days after, and depending on the time period you're looking at, it could be up to a week or more after, depending on what was going on. This is especially true if this is a soldier who died during wartime due to various reasons to do with the government and the way military works. Those could take a few weeks to appear. So again, this is unusual, and I can tell you just from knowing this history, she passed away very early in the morning, and that's why they were able to get the obituary in for her the day that she died. So there are a lot of other things that we have other than newspapers that are microfilm and microfiche that might be useful. One of the other most used collections we have on microfilm are the city directories. So city directories are directories, and you're usually focused on a particular city or region. Some smaller towns will be included in the directories for other places. So for Boston, we have directories on microfilm from the years 1790 to 1960. So we don't necessarily have one for every year, particularly in the late 18th and early 19th century. They weren't published every year at that time. A lot of these have been digitized, and they are available online. They're kind of scattered though, so we've put together this helpful guide to point you towards where some of these are online. If you're looking for something from the 19th century, the Boston Athenaeum has digitized all of them from the 19th century. So from 1789 to 1900, they have them all online. So that can be a pretty useful thing. Want to try looking at some of these from home. We do have not just Boston, we have directories for cities and towns all over the country, although again, primarily for Massachusetts, but we do have major cities. I think we have some from, for instance, San Francisco, Chicago, New York City, I think Los Angeles, and a few other places. So in that same directories guide, we'll have information about which ones we actually have. You can see which ones we have from Massachusetts. And you can look at a listing of what we have from around the country. So you can see here just on the first page, we have one from Washington State, stuff from Oklahoma. So definitely either ask us or check out this list to see if we might have something, because it's entirely possible that we do. Okay, let's see. So another pretty widely used resource we have that's on microfilm are telephone books, and those cover from, believe it or not, 1894 to 2001. There were, in fact, people with phones back in 1894, not that many. So it's a much smaller book than the phone books we got in recent times, but they did exist. People had phones, so there were phone books. So those are mostly going to be in microfilm. We do have some more recent years, like from about the 90s onward, we do have some hardcover Massachusetts phone books. And we also have some Massachusetts phone books and phone books from other states. Again, they're going to tend to be more from the bigger cities that cover 1974 to 2005. So we don't really have much past that era. Of course, phone books aren't really used too much these days, what with the internet and all. So there's really not much past that time, but we definitely do have them from most of the 20th century. We have those. Okay, so we're gonna now switch formats a little bit. Still talking about newspapers. Now we're gonna go to databases. We have quite a few databases that you can look at newspapers in. So we're just gonna show you on our website. If you have an e-card, at least an e-card with us or a physical card, you can access a lot of these from home. So this is pretty exciting. We just recently were able to get a few current newspapers, including the Boston Herald. So that's pretty cool. But mostly the ones you're probably going to use for genealogy research are the older ones. So the big ones that get used are obviously the Boston Globe, which covers 1872 to 1990. And the Jewish Advocate from 1905 to 1990. 19th century US newspapers, which is pretty self-explanatory. And down here, it shows you which ones we have access to in there. The New York Times from 1851 to 2018. Newspaper Archive, which covers a lot of New England and also and then also randomly Delaware, Washington, D.C., and New Jersey. Primarily from the late 19th, early 20th century. However, there are some titles in there that go up to the 1990s. So definitely worth checking out there. Okay, and so also if we scroll down a little farther, we get to MyHeritage Library Edition. So this is a genealogy database that has access to a lot of newspapers. And a lot of the newspapers in here, particularly the ones from Boston, were newspapers on microfilm provided by the BPL. We partnered with them in a project where they scanned a lot of our newspapers on microfilm, and that's what you could access in there. I will say though, if you're using this one, the search function is a little weird. So if you're looking for a person, you're fine. You just type in the first name and the last name and you're good to go. If you're not looking for a person, but if you're looking for instance, a place or an event, you're gonna kind of have to fudge it a little bit and put half of it in the first name and half of it in the last name, because this keyword search function does not work. I don't know why they have it there, but keyword search in MyHeritage does not work. So that's just something to keep in mind. But mostly if you're looking for obituaries or things like that, you're going to be using the name search anyway, so it shouldn't really be a problem. So, sorry, another thing, the ones that cannot be used from home, there will be a note here, but I'm pretty sure most of the ones you're going to want to use can be used from home. There's just a couple like Harper's Weekly that you can't use from home, but most of these you can use from home, should you be so inclined. Okay, so now we're going to go over how to find an obituary in a database. So much like finding an obituary in microfilm, the main thing you will need is a name, death date, and location of death ready. You can get away with not knowing everything if you're doing a database, just because it is a searchable format. So you can kind of fiddle with it a little bit, but this is still very useful information to have. It'll be much easier for you to find something if you have this information. So the second thing you're going to want to do is check the databases, the listing that we just showed you, to see which database would be most appropriate. And you're going to go into the database. You're going to go into advanced search. You're going to enter the name and the approximate time of date of death in the search form. Look through the results. If you find it, you can print or save it. If you can't find it, you can ask us for help. We're going to do another example here. So this is someone I picked randomly. So we're going to look for John Furlong. So we know he died on March 22nd, 1913, and he lived in South Boston, Massachusetts. So that's who we're going to be looking for. So now let's see if we can recreate this. I did the search a while ago. So we're going to go into, because we know he lived in Boston and he died in 1913, we're going to go for the Boston Globe in 1872. I'm going to click on Advanced Search. So in the newspaper databases, particularly if you're looking at the Boston Globe, you do not need to have the whole date in here. In fact, I would recommend you don't put in the date. So we're gonna, okay, so oh, where did we leave off? Okay, so he died on March 22nd, 1913. So we're gonna just put in March 1913 because we don't know what day that would have been published. So we're going to type in his name there. And let's see what comes up. Okay, see, this is what I was afraid of. All right, so sometimes you might want to put in the name in quotes, especially if it's both names are common on their own. You don't want to get all the Johns and all the Smiths. But that didn't work, so we're going to try it without the quotes. There we go. Okay, so here we go. So already we see two results here that say obituary, and they're published on the same day. So March 23rd, which is the day after he died. There's one thing published on the 8th, on the page 8, and one on page 16. Let's look at what's on page 8. Okay, so here we have a nice little write-up. So this tells you there was a little headline here. He was had a position with banker and tradesman, so he was somewhat important in the financial industry. That tells us more about him. So this is partially why obituaries are useful. It can tell you more about a person. It tells you where he lived. He died at his home, so now we know where he lived at the time of his death. It lists his survivors, so we know he had a wife. We have his children's names. So, his children were named John, Annie, Louise, and Agnes. Tells you approximately when he was born, tells us where he was born, when he came to Boston, and a bunch of other things about him and where the funeral will be. So that's what's in that. So we're going to go back here to what was published on page 16. So this is a good example. These are death notices. The first thing we showed you, that was an obituary. Most people, particularly people who passed away in Boston, they're just going to have these death notices. So death notices are basically like classified ads. They're very, very small. There's not a lot of information in them. Let's see if I can make this as big as possible. There we go. So there's not going to be as much information here, but it can still be useful. So you see, this tells you when he died. Now this one, unlike the obituary, gives his wife's name. The other notice just said that he had a wife. This tells you when the funeral will be, when mass is, and a couple of his memberships. So most people, you're just going to get this death notice. I just happened to randomly pick someone who is somewhat important locally, so he also had an obituary. But for the most part, if you're looking at the Globe, you're just going to get a classified ad like death notice. If you're looking at a newspaper for a smaller town, like for instance, the one for my grandmother, that you're more likely to get a full obituary write-up and not just a death notice. Okay, there we go. So this just shows you what we found here. So that's what you can find just by searching a database. So you can find newspapers in other places rather. So there's other resources that we have. So we looked at that newspaper guide. We also have a section of our genealogy research guide on how to find an obituary. This goes into much more in depth than I am able to here, because there's a lot of different things you might need to keep in mind when you're looking for an obituary or a death notice, and it'll go into how to figure out when the person died if you don't know that information. So this is some pretty good information to have. One of my coworkers put this together. And there says, just shows, this is again, just a link to the list of the newspaper databases. So we've looked at that. It was redesigned recently, so I would say just you might need to look at the whole page to find what you're looking for. And we have a lot of new things that are pretty cool. So there's a lot to check into here. All right, so talked about newspapers. Now we're going to talk about some other print resources. So this is Bates Hall. This is probably the most famous room here at the BPL. If you Google BPL, you're going to get a picture much like this. So print resources, this is basically where you're going to be finding them. You're going to want some things you will need to request at the Research Services desk, which is located in the Washington room. You can see here, this is a map of the second floor of the McKim building. This is where you're primarily going to be finding all the things I'm going to be talking about. So down in the lower right-hand corner here, you can see Washington room, and there's sort of that eye right there. It marks where the desk is. So that's where you're going to want to go to ask for help to find any of these things. So you will need to talk to us if you're looking for something. If you've found something in the catalog, if it says anything other than Bates Hall, you will need to come talk to us and we can go get it for you. If it's out in Bates Hall, which is this room right here, you can just go ahead and grab it if it's in there. You don't need to come talk to us. But if it's anywhere else, you will need to come talk to us. And also, if you're looking in the catalog for things, if it just says social sciences, just come talk to us. That means the location isn't marked there. So it's probably something that's in the closed stacks. So again, really just come talk to us. Another place you're going to want to find some of the things we're going to be talking about is the delivery desk. The delivery desk is just right across the lobby from where the Washington room is. What you're going to be looking for there are pretty much all of our published family genealogies. So we're going to be taking a look at an example of one of those in a little bit. So there's a lot of things that we have there, mostly because we just don't have room. This is basically, this section here is all the room we have for things that we can put out in the public areas. Everything else is in a closed stack area. We just plain do not have the space for it. Okay, so like I just said, anything that's not Bates Hall, you have to ask us about. Anything that says central delivery desk in the catalog, you have to get it at the delivery desk. So as I said, that's on the second floor near the connecting hallway that connects the McKim building to the Boylston Street building. You do need to have a library card with us in order to request anything that's not in Bates Hall or the alcove. So if you do not have a library card with us, you can get one, the borrower services desk or the delivery desk when you get here. If you live in Massachusetts and you have a library card with another public library, what you can do is register that card with us, and then you can use that. And if you're visiting us from out of state, you can get a research card. So we like to try to make it as easy as possible for folks to access what we have. So you come in, you'll be able to get it somehow, even if you have to get a research card. So now we're going to talk about a few of the useful print resources we have at the BPL for genealogy research. So this is the balcony. You can see that that was a listed location in the catalog. This is the balcony. You are not allowed up there. It is really not a great place to be. Folks are fascinated by it, though. I don't quite get it myself. I don't like going up there. You can see one of the bigger collections we're going to talk about in a little bit, these red books here, those are the Harvard class reports. I love those, and I'm going to be talking about them in a little bit. So the first thing we're going to talk about are lists of residents not for Boston. So we do have Boston list of residents going back to the early 20th century, but we also have lists for other cities and towns in Massachusetts. So if you were to look at these in the catalog, they might be titled something like this, one for Middleborough, persons listed by the registrars in the town of Middleborough for the year, whatever. It's going to be a title like that. It might be varied. And this here, this is an example from the Middleborough directory. I believe this is 1963. I'm not 100% sure on that. So the years that we're going to have for each town is going to vary. We don't have a complete set for anything. These are just kind of randomly sent to us by the state library. We're not quite sure how it works. Some of them are cataloged, but some of them aren't. So again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. If you're looking for a year that's not in the catalog, ask us because we might still have it. We are working on getting things cataloged, so it's a little easier for folks to find things. But for now, if there's something in the catalog you can't find, ask us because we might just have it. So the lists are basically, most of them are going to be laid out like this. It'll be organized by street. So it'll have the house, the number of the house, a list of residents. In many cases, they'll have information like their age, their occupation, where they lived the year before, if it was somewhere else. This one just happens to have where they were from, what their native citizenship was. So you can see here, we know this person was originally from Poland, and these folks are from Lithuania. So they can have some random information like that. Some of them will also have information about if they were a veteran. The women are sometimes going to be marked as well. That's another thing to keep in mind. A lot of these, the information was drawn from voter registration rolls. So if someone wasn't registered to vote, they're not going to be in here. And so that means that women will not be listed at all prior to 1921. It'll just be men. That's something to keep in mind if you're using these. Women won't be listed before we got the right to vote. So another resource, that print resource that I am particularly fond of are the society directories. So this right here on the right is an example of the Clark's Boston Blue Book. This is one of the main ones we have for Boston. A lot of these have been digitized. We have a link to it right here. And again, don't worry, you'll be getting this link in the in the slides that I'll be sending you tomorrow. So you can see here we have from 1876 up to 1937. So you can see here an example of what they look like. And again, it's organized by street. I'll have the street number, the name of the people. It's not going to have everyone in the house. It'll have the head of household and their spouse if they have one. And that's who they will have there. The other big one is the social register. It's laid out very similarly to this. In fact, during this time period, the late 19th, early 20th centuries, it's laid out pretty much exactly the same. There are two things that are very similar. They would only include the wealthy and prominent citizens of Boston. So this is kind of like a who's who of Boston. That's why it's called society, because it's high society. However, the main difference between the social register and the Clark's Boston Blue Book are that the social register did not include, say, Irish or Catholics. So you can see here, just as an example, here at 39 Wells Avenue, Mr. and Mrs. John F. Fitzgerald, that John Fitzgerald was the mayor of Boston the year this was published. So he and his wife are in the Clark's Blue Book. However, if you were to look at 1917 social register, they are not there. No one who is of Irish ancestry is there. So the social register is very much leaning towards heavily white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. They're not going to have, regardless of how much money they have, how prominent they are, they're not going to have anyone other than white Anglo-Saxon Protestants in there. So that's something to keep in mind. So there are far more direct society directories and other types of directories that we have. We actually have a directories section of the genealogy guide that goes into more detail on this. So these can be really useful, particularly if you're researching someone who is a little bit more socially prominent. Okay, so I mentioned it a little bit ago, the Harvard class reports. I absolutely love these. These are basically my favorite print resources that we have. They're very underused. We're working on getting them somewhere where they're a little bit more accessible and easier to find. So Harvard class reports we have from 1813 to the present with gaps. These are published by Harvard using reports that are submitted by alumni during class anniversary years. So traditionally, that'll be the 5th anniversary year, 10th, 15th, 20th, and so on. So again, these are filled out by the alumni themselves. What Harvard does is they will, what the alumni group for that class year will do, they'll send out a letter or a form, ask them to fill it out and to write a little bit about what they're doing. So these can be really useful. It'll have information about what they're up to, information about their life, their biographical information, their spouse, any children, their job, where they were living at the time, and just little descriptive paragraphs about what they were up to. And it can also have information about class members that died since the previous report. So there's usually going to be a section at the front or back somewhere in there that will list who passed away since the last report. In major anniversary years, like for instance, the 25th and 50th, there might also be a picture section. If you're really lucky, you'll get a picture section that has pictures of them from when they were students at Harvard, as well as pictures of them at the time the report was issued. So this example we have right here, I'm going to click on it to make it a little bigger. This is the third report for the class of 1904. And a member of class of 1904 was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So you can see here, here's an example. He had quite a bit of information about himself. He listed what he was up to, his job history up to that point, all of the memberships that he had, all the social memberships, his parents, his preparatory school, his wife's name, his children who existed up to that point, his current position. So at the time that he did this, he was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. I can tell you, in looking at other reports, he did like to talk about himself. In other reports, he has 2 whole pages to himself from what he wrote in. Whereas you can see here, this fellow just had 1 little paragraph, and that's all I contributed. Sometimes the people didn't include anything, like anything else. Like you can see here, oh, sorry, you can't see there, but there are other examples where they would just have the basic information and not write out anything about themselves. Or if they didn't write back, they'll have a note in here that's saying no response. But people like him, like FDR, he filled out the form every year that he was alive, and he wrote a lot of information for the report. So these can be really interesting and kind of amusing to see what they have. Another example that I like to show folks is, I believe, Harvard class of 1968. I believe it was the 50th anniversary class. So in 2018, there was an entry from Theodore Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber. They not only did they send him the form for the class report, he filled it out and returned it and listed his current address, which is obviously a federal supermax prison. So that's something that we all found very interesting when that book came in. So you never know who you're going to find in here. So if you had someone you're researching who went to Harvard, definitely check these out. You can get a lot of really cool information here, and you can even get some colorful things that you might not get in other resources. And we do have more information about this in the school records section of the genealogy guide. These are not all catalogs. We are working on that. So for now, what we have here is a PDF list of all of the issues that we have. I do keep this current. So this is everything that we have right now. The most recent thing we got was we have a commencement report for the class of 2020, which I didn't realize they started doing that. So this is everything that we have currently. Okay, so we mentioned these a little bit ago, published genealogies. So the example we have here on the right is from a history of the Putnam family from 1891. So these are basically what they sound like. They're genealogies that were published. So these are published, oftentimes they were written by members of the family. So it's going to vary. The one you see on the right here, that was a professionally put together and published thing because the Putnams are a locally prominent family in the Massachusetts area. But it's going to vary depending on who the author is and the type of publication. So we have some examples of things where it was written by a member of the family and it was just typed out on onion skin, put into a report binder, and that's what they gave to us. And there's not much in it. Sometimes there'll be these big, thick hardcover books that are nicely published on really good paper. Some of them were privately printed. A lot of the ones we have actually are privately printed and donated to us by family members, either by the person that wrote it or someone who found it after someone passed away or someone who was cleaning house and wanted to downsize. That's how we got a lot of these. The cool thing about these is everything, all of the ones that were published prior to 1923 have been digitized. We had a grant a few years ago, and all of these were digitized. So these can be found in the online catalog. So if we're going to pop over to the online catalog, so we're going to use an example, a history of the Putnam family, which is the one we were just looking at. Okay, and the catalog is thinking. There we go. So let's see. All right, so of course this did not work. Okay. So you can see here, so that was a bad example to use, but if this digitized version is here, it would have a link here to view the electronic version. So you could open that up and go into that. So I'm going to try this again. So if you're looking just for in general for a family and you don't know the title of a book, you can just do a subject search for the family name. You're going to get a lot of stuff here if you're looking up the Putnam family for the Salem witch trials, because they were prominent in Salem, and one of the daughters was one of the main accusers. So you're going to get a lot of stuff to do with Salem and the Putnam family. So you can get here, there's a lot of stuff. So down here, so this book has been digitized. So you click here to view a digitized item. It'll open up a new window in the Internet Archive. And then you can just go ahead and look at the book. So most of them are going to be laid out in a similar way. They'll have entries for a person that'll have their ascendant, their ancestors listed in reverse chronological order. So where they were born, if they did anything important, it'll have a little essay, a little more information on them. Some folks will have pages and pages of essays about them, depending on their importance in the family or their importance in general. And then they'll have a list of their children. So if there's no information, sometimes they'll put a note. If there is information, they will put information here. If there's a lot of information about a particular child, they will have their own entry. And generally what's going to happen is they will be numbered. So in the longer genealogies, you can see this one goes up to 7th generation at least. That's where this is taken from. The numbers go up into the thousands. So that makes it a little easier. If someone has a separate entry, you can just flip forward to their entry number. So if they have an entry number, they probably, next to their name, they should have another entry later on. Not necessarily always, but you can flip ahead and see if there is one. And then their entries will list their children and information about their spouses and so on and so forth. So these can be really good sources of information. However, they are generally put together by family members. And older ones in particular don't always cite their sources. So that's something to keep in mind. If there are no sources cited, you need to take the information here with a grain of salt, because some of them will just have family legend. It's not something that they fact checked. If they do list their sources, the more modern ones will tend to have sources. And you can go back to see what their sources are, see if they're legitimate, and go back to the original sources. So these can be good jumping off points. You wouldn't want to necessarily take everything in a published genealogy as absolute fact. Okay, so going onwards, another useful thing we have some obituary indexes. Going back to looking for obituaries, one cool one we have is obituary notices in the Boston Transcript. So this is something that a staff member at the BPL put together in the 1930s. They went through every issue of the Boston Transcript, made an index record for it. So if you have an ancestor that might have an obituary in there, you can check that book. That's something we can get for you. But that's not the only one we have. There are other sets that are professionally published that weren't done by BPL staff. So those things will generally have the date of publication, and in bigger sets that index several newspapers, it'll have the name of the newspaper, and if you're really lucky, it'll have the page number and the date. So another interesting thing, we have an example here on the right, are cemetery records. So the BPL has quite a few of these. They're mostly for the older and more well-known cemeteries. So this example here on the right is from the Granary Burying Ground that's on Tremont Street. That's something that's in Bates Hall, so you can go ahead and grab that. A lot of them are laid out very much like this. It'll be an alphabetical list of names, and it'll generally have their date of death and any other information they got from the tombstone. So these could be very handy because a lot of these were done in the 19th century when a lot of these headstones were still legible. Some of these headstones in the older cemeteries might by now be worn away or broken or otherwise you can't read it. So these can be really good to get information from a tombstone that was legible when they did it but isn't anymore. And some of these will also include complete transcriptions of what was on the headstone. And if you're really lucky, some of them might even have illustrations of the headstones. You're going to find that more for more prominent people. So for instance, in one of these books, there's a drawing of John Hancock's memorial at his gravesite. So in a lot of these cases, sometimes it'll have the location of the grave, it'll have a plot number. So this person, now we know it was buried in tomb 136. So if you're able to find a map of that, you could figure out where that grave is. And some of these have been digitized and are in the catalog. This one has, so you can always just check in our catalog. And okay, probably should close some of these tabs. There we go. So you can see we have quite a few. We have a book on Forest Hills. We have Dorchester North. And we have Cops Hill. We have King's Chapel, and the one we were just looking at for the Granary. We have Phipps Street Burial Ground in Charlestown. So we have quite a few of these. These can be really useful if you want to see where someone is buried. And also, again, to get information from a tombstone that you might not be able to read anymore. Okay, so these are very closely related to the published genealogies, but these are actually out in Bates Hall. You can take a look at them. So these are the published town histories. So these will be basically what it is, a town history that's been published in book form. This will most of the ones that we have, and we do have many from cities and towns all over Massachusetts. These will have histories of the towns from their founding up to the point that the book was published. So some of the older ones, if they were published in the 19th century, it'll only go up to that point. These can be pretty useful if you're researching someone who was an early settler in a town. They would probably be mentioned. A founder would be mentioned. Anyone who is prominent in society in that town, they would probably be mentioned. Again, sometimes they'll have a smaller scope. It won't be a comprehensive history. Sometimes it'll just be about the founders, but these can be really useful if you know what town you're researching. And right next to these town histories in Bates Hall are vital records. So these are what we call, as librarians, the tan books, because their covers are tan colored. So these were all done in the late 19th century. They were put together. They contained vital records published from covering from the founding of the town up to 1849 to 1850, because that's about when this project started. So you can see here, this example on the right is from the volume for births in the town of Beverly. You can see here again, they're all going to be laid out pretty much the same and very similar to the cemetery records book we were just looking at. It's going to be listed out alphabetically, have the person's name, In the case of births, it'll have their parents' names. So this here has BP, that's the date that this person was baptized. So you can get information about who someone's parents were. It won't give you it will not always give you the mother's maiden name, but this can be a good starting point if you're just trying to figure out when someone was born. So depending on how big the town is and how much information is available, there might be 1 to 3 volumes of this or even more. Generally, what you'll have, if you have a lot of people, there'll be a separate volume for births, marriages, and deaths. If it's a smaller town, they'll all be in one, or they might have births and marriages in one, deaths in another, or split out some other way. A lot of these have also been digitized, and you can find them in the databases Ancestry.com and also American Ancestors. Okay, these have also been digitized. They're in the American Ancestors database. This is the New England Historic Genealogical Society's register. So this is the oldest genealogy journal in the United States. It's been in publication from 1847 to the present. We have every single issue in hardcover here at the BPL. So these will have published genealogies, much like the ones we were just looking at, but they might also have essays on various issues related to genealogy research in England. They might have articles about groups of immigrants. They might have an article about a place, or they might have an article or an essay about a whole family, and that includes biographical information. So again, these can be searched in American Ancestors. If you're at the Central Library, we can also get these books for you. Okay, so we're reaching about the end. So this is just another little plug for the Genealogy Research Guide. There's going to be a link to this in your handout. So this is something covers a wide variety of topics, a lot that we couldn't get to today because there is a lot. So if you're interested in learning more about anything I've talked about, there's going to be more information here. We have sections on directories. We have sections on how to research female ancestors. We have a section on obituaries and a section on newspapers. So definitely go ahead and take a look at that. If you have any interest in genealogy or if you have any other things you want to read more about. So now I can open it up to questions. We have quite a bit of time left. So let's see what's in the chat box. Okay, let's see. All right, so let's see. Okay, so if no one has any, so I'll just wait a few minutes to see if anyone has any questions. If you have any questions about anything I've talked about or any questions about BPL or genealogy in general, feel free to put them in the chat box. See if I can make the chat box a little bigger. There we go. Let's see. So Tamara's asking, I'm in Canada and doing research on a Canadian-born World War II soldier who immigrated to the US in the 1930s. He did enlist in the Canadian Army. I am looking for photos of the soldier. Any tips on where I can find information, or would that be available online? So I don't really know about Canadian Army records. Let's see. I can find something. So you probably, if you know where in Canada he enlisted, I would start with the library there. They're probably going to have a better idea of what is available for them. So just for the heck of it, let's see. So there's probably going to be an archive in Canada. Let's see. For the heck of it, let's see what comes up. Oh, so okay, so there we go. So it looks like they do have, let's see, the Department of National Defense, I guess, in Canada, and library and archives. So that's basically who you're going to want to talk to, but I would strongly suggest that if you know where they enlisted, contact the library there. Oh, you're looking for photos of newspapers in the US. So So if, again, that depends on where he lived. If he lived in the Boston area, you can look at the databases we talked about. If he lived somewhere else, so basically it depends on where his family was. You would need to, if we have any newspapers from there, you can definitely take a look at those. We can help you out with that. But if they lived in another area that we don't have anything for, again, contact the library wherever that was, and they can probably help you with that. But again, that really depends on where his family was, whether and where he lived in America, as to where any photos or articles might be. Okay, so there we go. Oh, so Sue is saying there are groups for Canadian research on Facebook. Yes, genealogy groups are also another good resource. If you're having trouble, there's a genealogy group for pretty much every type of genealogy and every location. Okay, so Pam's asking, will my BPL e-card suffice for all online resources? No. But you can use most of them. So let's take a look here. So if you just look at the alphabetical listing here, there will be a note if you can't use it from home. So for instance, American Ancestors, it says here only available at the Central Library, or something like this, only at the Boston Public Library. So if you can't use it from home, it'll say it there. If there's nothing like this, you can use it from home. So you can get most of our things you can use from home with your e-card, but not absolutely everything, but most things you can. Okay, so Pam's asking if I can repeat if there's a way to get a regular library card the same day I come into Boston. Absolutely. So you have a couple of options. So if you live in Massachusetts and you have a public library card at a public library in Massachusetts, what you can do, you can register that with us, then you can just use that. You can also get a full service library card. You just need to see some photo ID. Or if you're not from Massachusetts, you can get what's called a research card. So that's another thing you would need to just show some photo ID. You can get either of these things. You can do that at the Borrower Services Desk, which is located on the first floor on the Boylston Street entrance, or you can do that at the Book Delivery Desk, which is where you go to request things that are in the book delivery staff. So those are what your options are. Craig's asking, is the research card the same as an e-card? No, it is not. A research card is a physical card. So that's something, it's a piece of plastic with a barcode on it. That's what folks who don't live in Massachusetts can get when they come here, so they can use anything in the building. So it's a physical card. The e-card only works for online resources. You can only use that for the databases and to download books and things like that. Those are open to everyone who lives in Massachusetts. And if you do have an e-card, so yes, you do have to be a Massachusetts resident to use the e-card. You need to either live in Massachusetts, go to school here, work here, or own property here to get an e-card. If you do happen to come in here and you have an e-card, you can upgrade it to a full service card once you get here. But the e-card is only good for things that are on our website. You can't use it for physical materials. Research card you can use for physical materials in the building. You can't use it for anything outside the building. So there are different things. So Pam's asking, do the cards expire? Yes, they do. I believe the current term is 2 years, but you will get a note if you're set up to get notifications from us. We will send you a notification when your card is about to expire. If you have an e-card, you can renew it yourself online. So you can go here under at bpl.org, services, then e-cards. So if you need to renew, you can click on this here, and as long as you put in the same email address that you used to register the first time, it'll come up with your number. And this is also useful if you have an e-card but you forgot the number. What you can do is go in there and find, and you can get your number that way, but you have to use the same email address you registered with. But yes, the cards do expire. E-cards is 2 years, and I believe physical cards are 4 years. Just that's something you need to keep in mind. But again, we will let you know when your cards are about to expire. So hopefully you don't get caught out. So we will let you know. Okay. Let's see, just looking back at the chat. So yes, so Sue is suggesting the Ottawa Archives Facebook Canadian pages and says, I would love it if they brought Ancestry back online. So I would too. That was nice that we were able to offer that during COVID lockdown. Ancestry.com was available from home, but unfortunately that ended at the end of December last year. So makes me very sad too. You know, it's kind of harder for me to show things to people if they can't follow along. I know a lot of folks like to follow along when I'm doing demonstrations, but you can use it. You can use Ancestry at any BPL location. Oh, I went back too far. Okay, so we have a few more minutes. I'll give you all a few more minutes in case you have any more questions. So if you're coming from the main page, you have a couple ways you can get to genealogy things. The easiest way, in my opinion, if you go to bpl.org, then under Books and More, click on Genealogy Guide right here under Learning and Research. That'll bring you to the Genealogy Guide. And then we have a section here, Databases and Websites, that will link you to all of the databases we have that are useful for genealogy. So that, to me, I think is the easiest way. So that's, if you're in the library, you can get to both of these, but if you're not in the library, you can't get to that. So the other way you can get to genealogy databases, go to bpl.org, Books and More, online resources. Then over here on the subject tile, click on View All, and then click on a biography and genealogy. So this will also include a bunch of newspaper databases because they are used quite a bit in genealogy research. So to get to the genealogy databases that you're probably going to use most often, it'd be way down here. So while you can't use Ancestry from home, you can use Heritage Quest online from home. So they're very, very similar. They're owned by the same company. Do a little comparison here. This is Heritage Quest, and this is Ancestry.com. They use pretty much the same graphics, similar layout, very similar graphics. Like I said, they're owned by the same company. I like to call Heritage Quest Ancestry Lite. They have a lot of overlap with Ancestry.com, but not all the different things. So and also you can't do a search of everything at once. You have to pick an area to search. Those are the main differences. And it is not the same as myheritage.com. That is a different website. This is a relatively new one. We just got it this year. So again, yeah, this is a different one. This one is a little harder to search. As I said, this is the one that the keyword search does not work. But again, if you're looking for a person, you're golden. You don't really need to worry about it. So let's say, for instance, I want to try to find information about my grandmother in here. Okay, so they do have things that are very similar to Ancestry. They're also going to have the census, some birth and marriage records, and they also have newspapers. You can see here, yeah, so they do have a bunch of newspapers. So this is pretty useful. Okay, so Vicky's asking if we have newspapers.com. No, we do not. Sadly, that's basically the one big one that we do not have, unfortunately. So no, we don't have newspapers.com. So let's see. So if we get back here, yeah. So what you would want to do, actually, I forgot. I'm looking for Herman. Or actually, what's her maiden name? Okay, here we go. So if you're looking for newspaper articles, then if you're looking for obituary or something for someone who lived in Massachusetts, you want to click on Massachusetts newspapers down here. So let's see, publication place, you can see here. So they're not going to have my grandma's obituary. They do not have anything from Pittsfield. So this is probably a different person. Okay, so Teresa's asking, do we have genealogy make? No, we do not. That's the other big one, I guess. That's another big one that we do not have. We do not have genealogy bank. Genealogy Bank, though, they do offer a free 7-day trial, as I believe does newspapers.com. So if you're not going to be doing extensive research in there and you're just looking for 1 or 2 people, that might be something that's worth it for you to do. So there's gonna be all of these newspaper databases. There might be a little bit of overlap, but there will always be some titles that are only in one of them. They all probably have their uses, but unfortunately, you know, we can only have so many. Okay. Let's see. All right. So, okay. So we also do not have fold 3. Fold 3. So fold 3, for those of you who don't know, that's a genealogy website that focuses on military records. So that's something that I would love to get, but we do not have it. Unfortunately, it is quite expensive. So there are some budget decisions that were made above my head. So unfortunately, we do not get that. I think, had a trial for it a while ago, like a couple of years ago, and it was kind of glitchy at the time. So yes, Ancestry does own Fold 3. So the thing about Ancestry, they own newspapers.com and Fold 3, but you do have to subscribe to all 3 separately or get one of Ancestry's package subscriptions if you want access to all of them. We only subscribe to Ancestry Library Edition. So you'll sometimes see results in Ancestry.com if you do a search that go to Fold 3 or newspapers.com. Especially, they do have an obituary index for newspapers.com. You'll see results from there, but you won't actually be able to access it because we do not subscribe to those 2. So some folks do have the package subscription where they have all 3, or they subscribe to all 3 separately where they can do that. Unfortunately, that's not something we can do. That was prohibitively expensive for us. So Ancestry.com is very expensive. That's why you can only use it at the library. The license normally to use it remotely is way too expensive. In fact, I don't think they even really offer it anymore. That was just a temporary thing during COVID lockdown. So unfortunately, it's just not something we have. Okay. So let's see. So they've done it. All right. So unless there are any other, yes. So Teresa's saying, if anyone is near visiting the Berkshires, please make a stop at the Berkshire Athenaeum in Pittsfield. They subscribe to Fold 3. So I should mention that I'm actually originally from Pittsfield, and I know several people who work at the Berkshire Athenaeum. It is a lovely little library, and yes, they do have Fold 3. They have fewer databases, though, so I guess it financially worked out for them. It didn't work out for us. So, okay, so Pittsfield, can pull that up for you. It's my hometown. Pittsfield is in western Massachusetts. It's right on the border of New York State. So it's this little tiny square over there. So if you're ever going through Route 20, Route 9, or wherever you go through Pittsfield, definitely feel free, take a, stop off at the Berkshire Athenaeum. They do have Fold 3. Let me see. I can pull up their website for you. Actually, that was my first job, was there. Okay, so let's see. Do they have their online databases? Family history and genealogy. Yes, so they have, so just like them, Ancestry is only in the library. And so they don't have, so for them, I think they got some sort of deal on that somehow. I forget exactly. Would BPL consider posting a link to familysearch.org? Yes, there are actually several links to various aspects of that in our genealogy web guide, but I can definitely ask our web team if they could add a link to that in here. That's an excellent idea. I will ask them if they can do that. Okay. All right. So I think that's probably about it. So if no one has any more questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap up now. Oh, well, hello from Alaska, Cheryl. Thank you for joining us. So thank you everyone for joining us. Just to remind anyone, or to let you all know if you weren't here at the very beginning, this class was recorded. I will be sending a link to the YouTube recording once it's ready, which will hopefully be within the next few days, or at least within the next week. I'll send everyone who's registered, I'll send that link. Tomorrow, everyone will be getting a follow-up email that will have links to the handout, as well as the PDF version of my slides, and also the chat transcript will be included in that. So keep an eye out for that email tomorrow. It'll be coming up. And if you have any more questions, if there's anything I didn't get to or anything you forgot to ask, you can just send an email either to me. My email is going to be in your Zoom reminder, or you can send an email to ask@bpl.org. So again, thank you all for coming. This has been lovely, and I hope we will see you next time.